All right, back again on the Fantasy Football Podcast. Regular season finished with. What an eventful night it was last night. That Monday nighter really, kept us going until the end. It was kind of a crazy finish, and we have our playoff team. So congratulations go out to Arielle for being tops in the league, and Deutsch from the same division for winning the wild card. Billy for his last second clinching of the MAM division, and to myself for winning Lane Bryant. So good job, everybody. The podcast is going to be pretty short, really just looking at the two two postseason matchups we've got going on. Starting with Billy versus Arielle. In the regular season, these two teams were 1-1 against each other. Now, obviously, I'm going to break down the rosters. I don't know, what waivers are going to hold tomorrow. I also don't know, exactly what roster decisions people are going to make. I don't even know what roster decisions I'm going to make at this point. So, I'm just kind of analyzing, the matchup. So, looking at Billy, he's got Drew Brees against Tampa Bay, and then Aaron Rodgers against Chicago. Meanwhile, Arielle has Eli Manning at Atlanta, and then, he's probably going to have Colin Kaepernick at New England because we don't know if RG3 is going to play at Cleveland. So, obviously the determining factor is going to be if RG3 plays or not. I would say, let's act as if he's going to be out. It seems like a pretty bad injury. So, who knows if he's a quick healer, but I would imagine he's probably going to be out this week. I would give the edge to Billy here. Honestly, even if RG3 did play, I probably would still give the edge to Billy. This is sort of why I was so surprised to see Arielle select Billy as his opponent. I don't know how you can actively elect to face Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers. I understand they've both been a little shaky lately, but Rodgers is playing the Bears, which is a team that he always rips up, and Brees is at home in the Superdome. So, I don't know. Eli should have a fine game against the so-so Atlanta. I think, Kaepernick could be in for a pretty rude awakening at New England. I mean, really, he's kind of shown in the last couple of weeks that he's not quite as good of a thrower as he showed against the Bears in his debut. He's really, put up his points when it comes to running. He did have that massive run to close out the game against Miami this past weekend. If it wasn't for that, his game would have been pretty bad. So, Arielle better be hoping that RG3 comes back. All right, looking at the running backs for these two, Billy has his main man, waiver wire superstar Alfred Morris at Cleveland. He's got Ahmad Bradshaw at the Falcons, and then he's got Steven Jackson versus Minnesota. And then meanwhile, obviously all you need to know about Arielle is that he's got Adrian Peterson, he's got Arian Foster. Really it's not even worth mentioning who they play. It doesn't really matter. The edge is to Arielle. It's not quite as large of a margin as you may think. Nothing is more reliable than Peterson and Foster putting up major points. They've been doing it all year. They're number one and number two in fantasy football. So, that's obviously the strength of Arielle's team, but Alfred Morris has some pretty serious upside this weekend. I think with RG3 out, he's going to get a ton of work. And I think, honestly, Ahmad Bradshaw is always a pretty good option. David Wilson looked pretty good last week, though, so maybe it's possible that he might eat into some of Bradshaw's workload. If that is giving Billy pause and he gets gun-shy and sits Bradshaw. Steven Jackson scored last weekend. He's broken double digits 3 weeks in a row. So, Billy's got a pretty solid running back core. Obviously, the strong edge is to Arielle. Peterson and Foster is pretty much all you need to know. So the edge goes to Arielle there. Looking at wide receivers, Billy has got Julio Jones against the New York Giants. He's got Brian Hartline at home against Jacksonville. He's going to have Anquan Bolden against Denver. And then as a long shot, he's got Jeremy Curley on Monday Night Football at Tennessee. Arielle's wide receivers, pretty solid group. He's got Victor Cruz at the Falcons. He's got Dez Bryant, potentially playing versus Pittsburgh. He's got Mike Wallace at Dallas in that same game, and then he's got Brandon Lloyd against the Niners. So, it's a pretty serious edge here for Arielle, even if Dez sits out. Julio Jones, of course, is capable of, taking over any games, but he's kind of found some ways to stay quiet as of late. Anquan Bolden's been catching TDs lately, but can't really be, actively relied upon for big points, especially because he's going to be covered by Champ Bailey. Curley and Hartline are both sort of shots in the dark. I would, if I had to pick, probably go with Curley. Arielle, meanwhile, he's got Victor Cruz, who's always sick. He's got Mike Wallace, who is kind of appearing to return to form a little bit with Big Ben coming back. Des Bryant is still a little bit up in the air as to this point if he's going to play or not. Apparently, he's got some torn ligaments in his hand. The initial report was that he was out for the year, but that now he's saying that he'll play through it if doctors clear him. So we're not really going to know here for a little bit. But even if he does play and he's hurt, or if he doesn't play, I think Arielle is probably going to end up starting Mike Wallace because I believe I forget if it was Carr or if it was the kid that they got from LSU, but one of the Dallas corners got hurt pretty bad last week, and so Wallace has got a pretty good matchup with Roethlisberger back in there. And then honestly, if he needs to, Brandon Lloyd really, he's not a starting option, but he had a huge week last week, so Arielle really can't miss here. Definite edge to him. Looking at the tight end, Greg Olsen at San Diego for Billy, or Vernon Davis at New England for Arielle. So, crazy as it might sound, I've got to give the edge to Billy here. Olsen, honestly, has been pretty reliable since Cam Newton figured it out a couple of weeks back. It was, around the same time Alex Smith got benched for Kaepernick. Vernon Davis kind of appears to have gone with him. So, Davis has put up 1.9 points total in his last 3 games. He's been fully healthy. He's been out there for pretty much every snap. He's really just not a part of the game plan. So, definite edge to Greg Olsen there. At San Diego, it's not much of a defense. So, tight end is a win for Billy. Predicting this matchup, it's sort of tempting to root for the Giants to blow it in Atlanta, for Alfred Morris to carry the load and get bad luck Billy to the Super Bowl. But honestly, I just don't see it happening. Peterson and Foster are just too good to overcome. Even if RG3 misses the week, Arielle, probably has enough firepower to advance. So I would imagine Arielle would win. All right, next matchup, myself versus Brian Deutsch. In the regular season, this matchup also was 1-1, so no advantage there. Looking at quarterbacks, these are pretty solid quarterbacks here. Cam Newton at San Diego, and then Matt Schaub hosting the Colts for Deutsch. And then for myself, I've got Tommy Brady at home on Sunday night hosting San Fran, and then I've got Andrew Luck at Houston. I've also got Cutler, but there's no chance in hell I'm playing him. Really looking at it, I would give the slight edge to Deutsch, very slight. Brady is always good at home in December. It doesn't matter that he's playing the Niners. He's reliable at this point. He's been incredible the last couple of games. Speaking of incredible the last couple of games, Cam Newton has been incredible the last couple of games. The Chargers D is not going to be able to slow him down. So both of those guys should put up great points, big point totals there. Schaub was absolutely terrible last week, but I'm sure he's looking to bounce back. I think, especially with that loss, they're sort of starting to feel Denver chasing them a little bit. And even, honestly, if you look at it, the Colts could still win the division. So the Texans are going to have everything to play for this week. And I would imagine Schaub will bounce back against a pretty bad Indianapolis defense. Last week, Andrew Luck wasn't so hot, but he's sort of shown a knack for playing well in big games. He put up big points against the Packers a couple weeks back when they upset them at home. So, I feel confident in Luck. Like I said, my only other option is Cutler against the Packers, and it's just not a very good idea. So, give the slight edge to Deutsch there. Looking at running backs, Deutsch has Stephen Ridley versus the 49ers. He's got Darren Sproles versus Tampa Bay, and then he's got Vic Ballard at Houston. For my own team, I've got Marshawn Lynch at Buffalo. I've got Reggie Bush versus the Jaguars, and then I've got Darren McFadden at home versus the Chiefs. So I would give a pretty strong edge to myself here. Ridley has definitely been really good. He scored a touchdown in 5 straight games, which is really impressive. He looked great on Monday night. But the 49ers actually are pretty good against the run. So, I think Brady is kind of matchup proof when it comes to passing the ball. Ridley is not quite there yet. So they're definitely going to key on shutting him down. Might be more of a passing game for the Pats. As far as Darren Sproles, he did score 2 touchdowns last week, which is great, but he's proved all season long that he's not really that consistent. He scored 2 touchdowns last week. He could score 2 this week, or he could put up nothing. So, Brian might be tempted to start Vic Ballard over Sproles. The Texans got run on pretty good last week, so, that's tempting. And obviously, he'd be stealing some points from me if Luck were to dump it off to Ballard. Meanwhile, for me, Lynch is heading to Toronto for a revenge game against the Bills, who let him leave town. I'm still kind of undecided on who my second back is going to be, Bush or McFadden, but really both have great matchups. Both put up double-digit points last weekend. I would imagine I can't really lose with that choice. I would hope at least. All right, looking at wide receivers. Deutsch is going to have Andre Johnson against Indianapolis. He has Marcus Colston against Tampa Bay. And he's got Kendall Wright against the Jets on Monday night. And then, obviously the status of Jordy Nelson against the Bears and Cecil Shorts against the Dolphins, both of which are still kind of up in the air at this point. So you look at my team, I have Demaryius Thomas at the Ravens. I've got Torrey Smith in that same game against the Broncos. I've got Stevie Johnson in Toronto against the Seahawks. And then I've got T.Y. Hilton at Houston. And then I've got the tandem of Givens and Amendola versus Minnesota. So a lot of wide receivers to choose from here. Obviously, Demaryius Thomas for me is a must start, but beyond that, it gets a little murky. So there's no real edge as of yet. I mean, Cecil Shorts and Jordy Nelson, if they were both active and ready to go, would definitely give the advantage to Deutsch, but we don't really know either of their statuses yet. So I don't know. Honestly, let's act as if they'll be out. I think probably Nelson will be out, and I would say Shorts probably has a chance to play, but let's act as if they're both out. Andre Johnson is definitely a must start. Especially when he's pairing him with Schaub. Colston is playing at home in the Superdome where he's always a threat to score, so he's probably a must-start as well. So looking at that third spot, Kendall Wright would be the last player going in this matchup between me and Deutsch. It would give Brian something to root for on Monday night after a long weekend of not watching football for him, so he might be tempted to do that. But, Kendall Wright's not exactly a reliable option. So, Demaryius Thomas, as I mentioned, I'm going to have to start him there, but he does have a hard matchup on the road against the Ravens. I'm kind of totally undecided on the rest of the group. I don't really know. None of them are locks to put up points. Stevie J is kind of allergic to the end zone. Torrey Smith is just totally unreliable. I think Torrey Smith is in the argument for most up-and-down player in fantasy this year. It's not a great matchup, but I don't really know what to do with him. T.Y. Hilton might be a good option. The Texans secondary was beaten pretty bad last week. And then Chris Givens and Amendola might be good options as well. So I really don't know what to do, but I would honestly say, unless we know the status of Shorts and Nelson, there's not really an edge to be given out. Looking at tight end, I have Jason Witten against the Steelers, and Deutsch will have Kyle Rudolph against the Rams. I would give the edge to myself. Jason Witten, especially if Des Bryant is out, Witten's going to be a major target for Romo. Witten has been pretty reliable at home, if not spectacular. He's always a very steady source of 70 to 80 yards, and then obviously maybe there's an outside chance he'll score a touchdown, although probably not. Rudolph really was terrible last week. Christian Ponder just totally sucks. So, if you're choosing between the two, you got to go with Witten. As far as a prediction, I'm not going to predict the outcome of my own matchup. I definitely don't want to go on record as to say I'm going to win or I'm going to lose. I will say that if both Nelson and Cecil Shorts play, I'd be kind of hard-pressed to beat Brian. But, obviously our matchup is going to be decided by what goes down in Houston when the Colts play the Texans. That's definitely going to, especially if Brian starts Vic Ballard, that's going to take most of our attention. So, hopefully by the time Brian is boarding a plane for his honeymoon, I'll have this thing sewn up. All right, so that's your playoff preview. Time to open up the old mailbag here. Thank you guys for contributing. Starting off, Mr. Bauer, 2 questions. 1, what is your dream job and why? Is it to host a nationally syndicated sports radio show? And 2, we established in a recent podcast that there is nothing worse than paying for someone else to eat. At the time, I believe you were referring to significant others, but at least one gets something from that. Companionship, sexual release, ability to use the carpool lane on certain interstates, etc. On a scale of 1 to Bootsy's trade, how brutally awful is it going to be to cover the tab for having the worst division? Not the greatest questions, I'll admit, but I wanted to get something in before I shut down my email for a few hours. Peace, Denenberg. Believe it or not, Denenberg, my dream job actually has nothing to do with sports. Ideally, I'd like to be a water slide tester for major aqua parks across the world, or just quality control at the OG in Vegas. It brings me, much displeasure to pay for this dinner that's coming up. Not only because obviously it's my hard-earned cash and I'm gonna have to pay it on blooming onions or whatever, but really I had a great season. I drafted well, I played well, I made good decisions, I had good pickups. I was clearly the best team in my shitty division. Just because stupid Oaks and Plosker decided to sell out and Kraus couldn't fantasy score his way out of a paper bag means that I have to host this dinner of the damned. I don't know. I say fit to all this nonsense. I was against the dumb dinner thing anyways when we voted on it. And also, let it be known that Lane Bryant had the best intra-division record last year. So, my beak went unwetted. So what gives with that? All right, next question. Thoughts on Clown Bowl being in Week 17 and not 15? Who will be Clown? Is Clown Bowl more anticipated than the championship? If I win, where is the best place to hide from Plotzker trying to rape me? Justin. I love the Clown Bowl being in Week 17. I think it's great. I don't know if it's necessarily more anticipated than the championship, but it definitely ends up being more meaningful. Obviously, as we will, not necessarily spend a whole night out there, celebrating the championship. We definitely spend a whole night celebrating the clown. So, the key to this whole thing is that your ad drops have been disabled, meaning that, because it's Week 17, some of the best players on your team, Matt Ryan specifically, might not be playing. So this is going to make for an even more lame and therefore hilarious outcome. I would actually think that the Eagles are going to be that team that plays hard down the stretch because they took the first 2.5 months of the season off and they have something to prove and they're going to win their last couple games. So I would say advantage Plotzker. I will probably do a little Clown Bowl podcast preview in a couple of weeks, but I would say I would put my money on you becoming the clown, Justin. Really, there's nowhere to hide. Even in death, Plotzker will find you and rape you. So good luck. Next question. I had a cold last week, yet went to work every day. Maybe I was on too much NyQuil, but I got to thinking about how many people I may have infected. And then I really got to thinking, has anyone ever died as a result of an illness that I transmitted to him or her? In our lifetime, Google will track all this for the public, right? Smith. I would say depending on how you got to work, public v. private transportation, and how many meetings or interpersonal reactions you might have had during a workday, the number of those infected could be sky high. The fatality rate from those infections is probably a little bit lower, but there's not really much of a question that you've murdered dozens of people in the Chicago metropolitan area. And yes, if Google can track sex offenders down to the square foot, I'm sure they can detect Andrew Smith, a.k.a. Patient Zero. All right, thanks for listening to the podcast. Good luck this weekend. Obviously, congratulations to Brian Deutsch. He's getting married, which is pretty cool. Hopefully, he'll have his phone with him in his tuxedo so he can check me beating his ass. Thanks, guys.